Let's talk DNA, particularly CODIS and the 3 profiles that were brought up by Jay Logsdon in the June 22nd, 2023 filing by the defense, and also Ann Taylor during a court hearing on August 18th of 2023. Now, it says 2 of those were found in the house the victims were in. Now, that doesn't mean found where they were, just in the house. Is in the house the victims were located in. And the other was found on a glove outside the house. And Bill Thompson at the hearing said the following. So this is from the August 18th hearing. And Ann Taylor specifically pointed to 3 unidentified male DNA samples taken from the murder scene that the defense has not received. Prosecutor Bill Thompson countered, arguing that the defense already possesses everything accessible to the state. Thompson stated, "All I'm hearing is speculation that they wish there was something there. We can't respond to something that doesn't exist." Thompson concluded that the 3 samples in question were not uploaded to CODIS due to ineligibility. He claimed that the defense attorney, Ann Taylor, was informed of this by the lab. Well, we know it's not true that the defense didn't have this, because that hearing was August 18th, and in this filing back on June 22nd, 2023, Jay Logsdon admitted that they knew about the 3 male DNA profiles. So how did they know about those unless the prosecution had turned it over through discovery? And also, a lot of people are trying to say that those 3 got ran through CODIS, but there's no indication of that. Again, Bill said at the hearing they weren't ran through CODIS. And if you look at Jay's wording, he never specifically says they were ran through CODIS. Now, when he talks about Koberger's DNA, he says they performed the STR analysis that led nowhere when ran through CODIS. But when he talks about the 3 male DNAs, it says distinct male DNA profiles were not identified through CODIS. Jay is an expert at crafting his wording to infer things without flat out saying something that may not be true. Just like when he said no DNA that matched the victims was found in the car. He never said no DNA was found or that no blood was found, just that no DNA matching the victims. So if the DNA had been degraded, of course it wouldn't have matched anyone. But he conveniently leaves out if traces of anything else were found. Just like with this. They say Koberger's was ran through CODIS, but with the other 3, they don't say they were ran through. They just say they didn't match. They didn't get a match through CODIS. Let's say I'm signed up for Tinder. So I have a profile on Tinder, and there's 3 guys that go, "Oh, well, I didn't get a match with her." And they're like, "Well, did you go on Tinder?" "No, I didn't get a match through Tinder." Means they didn't go on Tinder, so they didn't get a match with me. Had they said, "Yeah, I went on Tinder and didn't match," so Jay didn't say they ran those through CODIS. He just says there was no match with CODIS. You have to read between the lines there. Now, what are reasons why you can't run something through CODIS? Why it wouldn't be eligible? Well, there's specific guidelines. Each state kind of puts out their own little handbooks. I found Idaho's, but it doesn't really explain in depth as well as some of the other states. So in order to make it easier for people to understand, I'm going to post things that I found from other states on how they explain it, especially to their law enforcement, about what samples are eligible. Now, this is a flowchart from the FBI, and I've highlighted the part where it says, was the DNA sample received directly from the crime scene, and is it attributed to the putative perpetrator? So putative means the likely person, basically the likely suspect. And it says yes, then you can continue to criteria 3. If no, it's not eligible for NDIS, which is the national level of running it through CODIS. You have LDIS, which is local, SDIS, which is state, and then NDIS, which is national, but they all make up CODIS. So it has to be directly from the crime scene, the victim, or the victim's clothing. and it has to be attributable to the putative perpetrator. So if you go to step 3, it says, if applicable, were elimination samples requested? Yes. Forensic DNA record is eligible for NDIS? No, not eligible. That's because in accordance with the Federal DNA Act, DNA records from persons who voluntarily submitted DNA samples solely for elimination purposes shall not be included at NDIS. But you also need to be doing elimination samples to rule out people. So, there was probably a lot of DNA in that house. They had just had a party on the Friday night. They were using all those samples they were getting from their friends. Like a lot of them voluntarily went and gave DNA. That's how they started ruling people out one by one. So you do have to get those elimination samples. And other elimination samples would also come from law enforcement and the lab staff. Now, this is a good one I found from Oregon, explaining to their law enforcement eligibility, because it kind of goes into scenarios. So you can pause and read it, but one scenario example. At the scene of a stabbing, a bloody knife is found near the victim. A DNA profile that is foreign to the victim from the knife is CODIS eligible. It was reasonably left by the perpetrator after stabbing the victim. Sounds similar to the sheath being left behind. Then we've got one that talks about beer bottles. So example, a shooting takes place at a party. Investigators seize the empty beer bottles. A DNA profile from the beer bottles is CODIS ineligible. Although it could be linked to the perpetrator, it could just as easily be linked to an uninvolved individual. Now, sounds familiar when they had a party there just a few nights earlier. Then it talks about if you're getting it off of the person themselves, it can't be ran through CODIS because that's a possession. The perpetrator's possessions are CODIS ineligible. Perpetrator's DNA could be on an evidentiary item independent of the crime because it is their possession. So I'll just let you pause and read through this document. Now, this is information I found from North Carolina for their law enforcement. And again, you see that there's criteria that have to be met. So that a crime has been committed, that demonstrates the DNA was recovered directly from the crime scene and is attributed to the putative perpetrator, and that elimination samples have been requested if applicable. It goes on to talk about, was the evidence item located in an area that is accessible to the public? Sidewalk, public building, parking lot. It is best when there is limited access to the location where the evidence is found. Does the evidence item belong to the victim? Was the evidence item present at the crime scene before the crime committed? Has the evidence item ever been touched or handled by someone other than the perpetrator? And this also goes on to talk about how you do not enter alternate standards for suspects into the database, and profiles from individuals identified as a person of interest are not entered into CODIS. So that last part kind of explains a little better why the glove that was found outside 1122 wasn't eligible to run in CODIS. It was found out in a public area. It wasn't found at the crime scene. It was found after the area had already been cordoned off, after they had already searched the yard. It was found days later. So there is no reasonable belief that it belonged to the suspect, and that the belief is just that it was inadvertently dropped by somebody in the days after. So it's not eligible to run through CODIS. They would actually have to show, to demonstrate to the lab that they believe it came from the suspect in order for it to be put into CODIS. So let's move on and look at some other things that will kind of help you understand this better. Okay, this is an FAQ for law enforcement in Vermont. It says, what qualifies for a profile for upload into CODIS? Evidence must be connected to a crime scene and sufficient information provided by the investigating agency to substantiate the connection. The evidence cannot be collected directly from the suspect's possession. Data obtained must be of a sufficient quantity to upload for state or national. And this is from Florida. A case scenario is required. The scenario should include where an item was found and the item's relationship to the crime to determine eligibility for possible entry into CODIS. Any profile being entered into CODIS must be unequivocally attributed to a putative perpetrator, and the item cannot have been collected directly from the perpetrator's person or property. Profiles are not eligible for CODIS may still be used for direct comparisons. This one's from the Houston Police Department, and it's saying an analyst must review the details that are available in the case documentation. If the documentation does not admit that a crime was committed, the profile is not eligible for CODIS. Then it says profiles that are unambiguously attributed to a crime scene or a victim are not eligible. Example, clothing found a mile from the crime scene, the victim's blood found on the suspect's clothing, contact swabs from a bank robbery without elimination swab of bank employees, contact swabs from a victim's stolen car without elimination swabs from the owner, driver of the car. If a suspect's profile could reasonably have been expected to be on an item that is at a crime scene or a part of the crime scene independent of the crime, then it cannot be uploaded as an unknown profile. Example, collecting a weapon directly from the suspect, collecting a toothbrush from the suspect's house, collecting a shirt directly from the suspect. Most of the profiles above can be CODIS eligible with the collection of known reference samples. Now, this is from North Carolina, and it talks about what is CODIS and the three main indexes: forensic, offender, and suspect. And it says, not everything submitted to the lab is considered crime scene evidence. And it says, can you articulate why this evidence is linked to the perpetrator? Was the item left at the scene by the suspect? Is the scene of the crime typically open to the general public, e.g. convenience store, parking lot, sidewalk, etc.? If so, how do you know the item collected was not left behind by a customer, employee, or someone other than the perpetrator? Details matter. Sometimes minor details can be the deciding factor in the determination of CODIS eligibility. Consider victim witness statements, video surveillance footage, and proximity to the crime scene, direction of the suspect, flight from the scene. It says, is the DNA profile obtained attributable to the alleged perpetrator of the crime? Not all profiles probative to the case are eligible for CODIS entry. For example, the victim's profile found on the suspect's clothing may be probative for investigative purposes, but not eligible for CODIS entry. The DNA profiles of any victims, witnesses, or consensual sex partners are not CODIS eligible. If possible, any LEO, crime scene personnel, or laboratory staff should be compared to the evidence as well. So you should probably have a pretty good understanding now of why certain things are in CODIS and certain things aren't. So if it's believed to be from the perpetrator, they can show a link from the crime scene that it's more likely than not to be from the perpetrator. That can be put in CODIS. If it's from the victim, it can't be put in CODIS. If it's from people they believe are unrelated to the crime, it can't be put in CODIS. So you might have a person of interest, their DNA can't be put in CODIS. So those three samples, we know one was found where it couldn't be put in CODIS anyway because of where it was located. The other two, we don't know where in the house they were. So let's say they were found in the laundry room. There's no reason to believe the perpetrator went to the laundry room. Those would not be eligible to run. Let's say they were found in the living room area on a beer bottle, like I mentioned before. There's no reason to believe the perpetrator, with as quick in and out as he was, and with Dylan seeing him walk by, that he stopped and drank some beer, and 2-day-old beer at that. So DNA on any of the bottles, etc., would not be eligible for CODIS. Now, there's one other thing I wanted to bring up, so I'll just show you this statement. Okay, so I wanted to read this. It is important to keep in mind that not all biological evidence is probative to the case. It is common to find biological stains at a crime scene that were deposited before the crime occurred or are not related to the case. So that means stains like semen, even vomit, things that could have been in the house when they had the party on the Friday night. Depending on where they were, depending on how old they were, they were not related to the suspect. We also know the victims weren't sexually assaulted, so if there was semen found in the house, it wasn't related to the crime. Wouldn't be eligible to run through CODIS. So we know 1 was found outside on a glove, 2 were found somewhere in the house. If they weren't eligible to run through CODIS, they likely were not believed to belong to the suspect because they were in an area that he didn't go into in the house, or they were on items that it wasn't believed that he touched. Beer cans, maybe a food box, Also, it could have been they were just degraded, because if they're too degraded, they can't run them through CODIS either. But usually with a crime scene like that, where there was lots of people in and out of that house in the days before the murders, it's DNA belonging to partygoers that had nothing to do with the suspect. And of course the defense is going to take it and use it for reasonable doubt. And that's exactly what they wanted when they put that out there, when Logsdon put out in the filing about the 3 DNA. It's not going to matter to people that it wasn't eligible to be run through CODIS. They're going to hear, oh, there was 3 DNA that they didn't check out. That's why I wanted to kind of show you what the guidelines are for what can go into CODIS, because everything found in the house can't be run into CODIS. It just can't. That's not what CODIS is set up for. It has to be very specific things that get entered into CODIS. So I hope this helps. And if there's something else you would like me to cover, let me know.